He was the feared Mafia boss, cold, ruthless, untouchable. His world was power, silence, and fear. But his only son lived in a different silence, the silence of being mute, ignored by everyone around him. No one ever tried to speak to the boy until one woman named Olivia stepped into his life. With gentle hands and kind eyes, she used sign language to reach the heart no one else dared to touch. And in that moment, everything began to change. This is a story of danger, trust, and a love so deep it defied fear itself. A woman's courage, a boy's smile, and a Mafia boss who never believed anyone could soften his heart until she did. Victor Moretti was a man the world both feared and respected. At 36, he ruled business empires, owned half the city's wealth, and commanded silence wherever he went. His name alone was enough to make powerful men tremble. But inside his mansion of glass chandeliers and marble floors lived a silence far greater than anything outside. The silence of his only son, Daniel. Daniel was 9 years old, a boy with blonde hair that curled softly at the edges and eyes the color of the ocean at dawn. But he had never spoken a single word in his life. Doctors called it congenital mutism. To Victor, it was a cruel punishment he couldn't protect his son from. Whenever Victor hosted parties, his house filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Yet in the corner of the great hall, Daniel always sat alone. A small sketchbook lay on his lap, where his little hands drew trees, houses, and faces. Guests glanced at him once, and then quickly turned away, whispering, "That's the mute boy, the boss's weakness." Victor heard them, every poisonous word. It cut him deeper than bullets ever had. He had fought wars in the streets, betrayed friends, and built an empire, but nothing made him feel more helpless than the look in his son's eyes when no one sat beside him. Daniel never cried, never complained, but his silence screamed louder than any voice. At night, Victor sometimes stood outside his son's room, watching through the slightly open door. The boy would sit by the window, tracing stars in the air with his finger, as though trying to speak to them, because no one on earth would listen. Victor clenched his fists at those moments. He could buy the world, but he could not buy happiness for his son. He could command loyalty from thousands, but he could not command love for Daniel. The boy's teachers at school had stopped trying. Other children avoided him. Relatives said he should be sent away to a special institution, but Victor would never allow that. Daniel was his blood, his soul. Yet he couldn't deny that the boy was slowly fading, retreating deeper into shadows of silence. One evening, Victor entered the grand dining hall where guests were laughing around the long oak table. His eyes searched the room, and there Daniel was again, in the corner, sketchbook open, drawing a bird flying high above the earth. No one noticed him. No one cared. Victor's chest tightened. He wanted to roar, to demand that someone speak to his son, but the words died on his lips. What use was force when love was absent? He sat down in silence, his heart heavier than ever. Behind all the wealth, behind the iron mask of a Mafia boss, Victor Moretti was just a father watching his child drown in loneliness. And deep inside, he made a vow. If fate ever sent someone who could truly see Daniel, he would protect them with his life. The Moretti mansion had seen countless tutors come and go. None stayed long. Some left in fear of Victor's reputation. Others left because they could not handle the quiet, unresponsive boy who seemed locked inside a world of silence. Victor had stopped believing anyone could reach his son. But one day, fate sent someone different. Her name was Olivia Carter, a 27-year-old woman with soft auburn hair, gentle blue eyes, and a quiet strength that shone brighter than gold. She walked into the mansion not like the others who trembled before Victor, but with calm steps, as though she carried something unshakable in her heart. Victor studied her in silence when they first met. She wasn't glamorous. She didn't dress to impress, but there was something in the way she looked around, like she was searching for the one person in the room who mattered most. and then her eyes found Daniel. He was sitting, as always, at the far end of the hall, his sketchbook open, his little hand moving across the page. The boy didn't lift his head when Olivia entered. Why would he? Every other adult had treated him like a shadow. But Olivia didn't walk past him. She didn't ask Victor for instructions. Instead, she quietly moved across the hall, bent down to the boy's level, and smiled. Victor almost frowned. No one approached Daniel without permission. No one dared. But Olivia did. She gently tapped the side of the sketchbook, and Daniel finally looked up. His ocean blue eyes studied her, guarded, suspicious. That's when Olivia did something no one in that house expected. She lifted her hands and began to sign. "Hello, my name is Olivia. What's your name?" Victor's breath caught in his chest. He recognized the movements of her hands immediately. Sign language. Daniel's small eyes widened. His lips parted slightly in shock. For a heartbeat, he didn't move, as if he couldn't believe it. Then, slowly, carefully, his little hands moved in response. "My name is Daniel." Victor froze where he stood. The room seemed to fall silent, the voices of servants and guards fading into nothing. For the very first time, his son was not invisible. Someone had spoken his language. Someone had seen him. Daniel's face lit up with a smile. An honest, glowing smile that Victor hadn't seen in years. His sketchbook slid off his lap as he eagerly signed more words, his small hands trembling with excitement. Olivia nodded, responding quickly, her own hands flowing with grace. In those few moments, the boy who had lived in silence was suddenly alive, communicating, laughing silently with shining eyes. Victor's heart pounded hard. He had fought enemies in the dead of night, faced bullets without fear, but nothing terrified him more than the emotions rising in his chest as he watched his son finally being understood. For years, Daniel had been a shadow in the corner, and with one smile, one gesture, Olivia had pulled him into the light. Victor didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching the impossible unfold, realizing that this woman was different from anyone who had ever stepped into his home. She wasn't just a tutor. She was the answer to the vow he had made in silence. Victor Moretti had built walls around his soul long before Olivia stepped into his life. They were walls of iron, layered with scars, betrayal, and the blood of enemies. No one dared to come close, not to his empire, not to his heart, and certainly not to his son. But now, night after night, he found himself standing in the shadows of the hallway, watching something he had never seen before. Daniel, his quiet, lonely boy, was laughing. Not with sound, but with his eyes, with his hands moving swiftly in sign language, with his entire small body alive with joy. And the reason for that joy was always the same: Olivia. She sat beside Daniel for hours, teaching him signs, encouraging him to draw stories, then signing them back to him as though every line he sketched was a masterpiece. She never rushed him. She never pitied him. She treated him not as a mute child, but as a boy with a voice the world had simply refused to hear. Victor felt something shift inside him every time he watched them together. It was dangerous, the kind of danger no bullet could kill. One evening, he entered the study where Olivia and Daniel were working. Daniel was showing her a drawing of a lion and a bird. Olivia signed back with a soft smile. "The lion is strong, but the bird is free." Victor's breath caught. He knew exactly what his son's drawing meant. Daniel was the bird trapped in the cage of silence, and he, Victor, was the lion, powerful but incapable of giving his child the freedom he deserved. Olivia turned her head then, her eyes meeting Victor's across the room. For a moment, the air tightened. There was no fear in her gaze, no trembling like everyone else, just calm understanding, as though she could see straight through his iron walls. Victor forced himself to look away, hiding behind the mask he had worn for years. But when he walked out, his chest ached with something he didn't want to name. Days passed, and Victor found himself drawn to Olivia more and more. He would catch the way her hair fell loose when she bent over Daniel's desk, or how her laugh, even soft and quiet, seemed to warm the cold marble of the mansion. But with that warmth came fear. He told himself over and over, "She doesn't belong here, not in my world. My enemies would destroy her. She deserves a life without shadows." And yet, when he tried to keep his distance, he failed. His eyes searched for her in every room. His ears waited for her gentle voice. His heart, once stone, beat harder every time she smiled at his son. Late one night, Victor poured himself a glass of whiskey, sitting alone in his office. The city lights flickered outside, but his mind replayed Olivia's laughter. He gripped the glass so hard it nearly shattered. "No," he muttered under his breath, "she cannot become my weakness." But deep inside, he already knew the truth. She wasn't his weakness. She was the one person strong enough to see the man beneath the Mafia boss. And little by little, despite all his walls, Olivia Carter was breaking through. Victor had always known that his son was his greatest treasure and his greatest weakness. Enemies whispered about it in the dark corners of the city. Rivals who had failed to break Victor's empire searched for cracks in his armor, and Daniel was the only crack they could see. For years, Victor had built walls of security around his son. Guards, cameras, locked gates. But hatred had a way of slipping through cracks even steel could not stop. One evening, while the sun dipped low and painted the sky with fire, Victor received a call that chilled his blood. A rival gang had been watching. They knew his boy was mute. They mocked that he could not scream for help if taken. They promised they would use Daniel to break him. Victor's hands shook as he ended the call. Rage thundered through him, but beneath the fury was fear he had never admitted to anyone. He could face bullets, betrayals, prisons, but not the thought of losing his son. That night, he doubled the guards around the mansion. He ordered everyone to stay alert. He even considered sending Olivia away for her own safety, though the thought tore at him. But fate struck faster than his plans. It was a quiet evening in the garden. Daniel sat on a bench, sketchbook in hand, while Olivia knelt beside him, teaching him how to sign new words for dream and freedom. The boy's hands moved eagerly, his face glowing in the fading light. And then, shadows slipped through the trees. Masked men, silent as the night, lunged forward. Their footsteps were muffled, their eyes cold with purpose. Before the guards could react, the intruders were inside the garden. Daniel froze, his sketchbook tumbling to the grass. He couldn't scream. He couldn't call for help. Panic clouded his small eyes. But Olivia moved. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around Daniel, shielding him with her own body. "Stay behind me," she whispered, though she knew he could not hear. Still, her trembling hands signed the words, and Daniel understood. The men advanced, weapons glinting under the dim lights. "The boy comes with us," one growled. Olivia shook her head, her entire body trembling but firm. "You'll have to go through me first." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. A young woman, fragile in appearance, standing against armed men with nothing but her courage. And then, a roar broke through the night. Victor. He stormed into the garden like a beast unleashed. His men followed, guns raised, fury blazing. The masked intruders had no chance against the wrath of the Moretti Empire. Shots fired, shadows scattered, and within minutes, the garden was cleared. Victor's chest heaved as he stood in the chaos, his eyes scanning until they found the only thing that mattered. Olivia, still crouched low, arms around Daniel, shielding him even though the danger had passed. The sight cut him deeper than any wound ever had. She had risked her life. She had stood where even his closest allies would have faltered. Victor dropped to his knees before them, his arms shaking as he pulled Daniel into his embrace. For a moment, the ruthless Mafia boss was just a father, trembling with relief. And when his gaze lifted to Olivia, his walls shattered completely. No woman had ever done what she did. No one had ever faced death just to protect his son. That night, Victor realized something terrifying and undeniable. Olivia Carter was no longer just his son's tutor. She was the heartbeat he could not afford to lose. The mansion was silent that night, yet the silence was heavy, full of questions, fear, and something Victor had never allowed himself to feel before. After the attack, Daniel had finally fallen asleep in his bed, his small hand still clutching the edge of Olivia's sleeve, as if afraid she might vanish if he let go. She had sat beside him until his eyelids closed, stroking his hair like a mother would. Victor stood in the doorway watching. His chest burned at the sight. His son, finally at peace, because of her. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the woman who had stood against death without hesitation. When Olivia quietly slipped out of Daniel's room, Victor followed. She walked to the library, the dim light of the chandelier casting a soft glow over her tired face. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling as she pressed them together. Victor entered silently, his footsteps heavy on the marble floor. For once, the Mafia boss had no mask. He didn't hide behind power or fear. His voice came out low, rough, almost breaking. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you risk your life for him, for my son?" Olivia looked up, startled. For a moment, she searched his face, as though weighing whether he truly wanted the truth. Then, with a deep breath, she spoke softly. "Because he deserves love, not fear. He deserves to be seen, Victor. All his life, people turned their backs on him. But tonight, if it cost me my life, I wanted him to know at least one person in this world would never abandon him." Her words struck like a blade, slicing straight through his soul. Victor's throat tightened. He tried to speak, but for a long moment nothing came. His chest rose and fell, his heart pounding like it hadn't in years. Finally, he whispered, his voice raw, "You don't fear me?" Olivia's eyes softened. "I don't see the Mafia boss everyone whispers about. I see a man who sits outside his son's door at night, watching him to make sure he's safe. I see a father who would burn the world for his child. That's the man I'm not afraid of." Victor's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to him like that. No one had ever seen past the shadows, past the reputation, past the blood on his hands. He stepped closer, his tall frame casting a shadow across her, but his movements were hesitant, almost fragile. His hand trembled as he reached out, brushing against hers where it rested on the arm of the chair. Her fingers didn't pull away. Victor lowered his head, his voice barely more than a whisper. "You don't understand. You are dangerous to me, not because of who you are, but because you make me want what I can never have." Olivia's heart raced, but she held his gaze. "Maybe what you've always believed you can't have is exactly what you need." The air between them thickened. Victor's walls, iron, unbreakable for years, crumbled under the weight of her words. His heart pounded like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to fall. For the first time in his life, Victor Moretti wanted something not out of power, not out of control, but out of love. And it terrified him more than any enemy ever could. The morning after the attack, the mansion felt different. The guards still patrolled. The city outside still whispered the name Victor Moretti with fear. Yet inside the great walls, something had shifted. Daniel woke with a smile. His hands moved eagerly in signs, asking Olivia to sit with him for breakfast. For the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of being ignored. He wasn't afraid of being unseen. Victor sat at the table, his eyes lingering on the sight before him. His son, once silent in the corner, was now alive, signing with quick hands, laughing without sound, but with all the joy of a child finally understood. And Olivia, her gentle patience, her radiant smile, was the reason why. Victor felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't known in decades. Power, money, and fear had built his empire, but none of it had ever brought him this: peace. Later that evening, Daniel sat on the carpet of the library, drawing with colored pencils. He finished his picture and proudly signed to Olivia, "Us, a family." Olivia's eyes glistened. She looked at Victor, silently translating the boy's hands. "He says, 'We are a family.'" Victor's breath caught. His gaze shifted to his son, so innocent, so trusting, and then to Olivia. She wasn't just a tutor anymore. She was the missing piece he had searched for all his life without knowing it. Slowly, Victor knelt beside Daniel, placing a strong hand on his son's shoulder. His other hand reached for Olivia's, his touch hesitant but full of meaning. His voice was rough, thick with emotion he could no longer hide. "Stay," he whispered. "Not as his tutor, not as a guest. Stay as someone we both need. Stay as the woman who brought light into our darkness." Olivia's eyes brimmed with tears. For years, she had fought her own battles, had longed for a place where her heart truly belonged. And here, in the most unexpected place, she had found it. "Yes," she whispered softly, her hand tightening in his. "I'll stay." Daniel, too young to speak but old enough to understand, leapt forward, wrapping his arms around both of them. His small hands moved quickly, signing over and over, "Happy, happy, family." Victor closed his eyes, pulling them both close. The Mafia boss the world feared was gone in that moment. What remained was a man, a father, who had finally found love, not through power or fear, but through kindness. From that day forward, the mansion was no longer a place of silence and shadows. It was filled with laughter, with the soft hum of love, with the silent but powerful language of family. Victor Moretti had conquered empires, but his greatest victory was letting Olivia into his heart. And in doing so, he gave his son the greatest gift of all, a voice that would never again be ignored. Final heartwarming lesson for society. Every child, no matter their struggles, deserves to be seen, heard, and loved. Daniel taught his father, and through this story, us all, that silence does not mean weakness. And Olivia proved that compassion can break walls no power ever could. True strength is not in fear or control. True strength is in love, patience, and the courage to embrace those who are different. And sometimes, the most dangerous man in the city can be softened by the simple kindness of a woman who dared to listen.